Everything is inflated. From the gas station to Walmart, prices are soaring to a level not seen in 40 years. The economy is threatened, and in these uncertain times, the one entity that has the power to make a change is the Federal Reserve. A central bank like no other, the Fed is the most powerful, yet the least understood institution in the country. From setting monetary policy to overseeing banking regulations, the Fed does the most important work for the economy, and its head is the most important official in times like this. So what does the current wave of inflation mean for the U.S. economy? How does Jerome Powell become the most important public official in the country? And what can we expect from the Federal Reserve in the coming days? Stay with me till the end to find out. Before moving forward, if you enjoy economics content, consider subscribing to my channel. I publish new videos every week about the untold stories of money, and only a small percentage of my viewers are subscribed. It's free, and you can always unsubscribe. The last time inflation reached these levels, we had Paul Volcker running things, and the Fed might have to follow his playbook once more. More on Volcker later. For now, let's focus on the man in charge, Jerome J. Powell. He's been called the boring choice for Fed chairman, but there are a few interesting things about him. For one, he is the first chair in 4 decades to not have a formal economics degree. Instead, Powell started off as a lawyer and then moved to corporate finance with Dillon Read in 1984, but he proved to be a quick learner, and as the 90s rolled in, he was working at the Treasury Department under George Bush Sr. And it was there that Jerome Powell dealt with his first major challenge as a public official, the Salomon Brothers scandal. During the 80s and heading into the 90s, Salomon Brothers was the most profitable investment firm on Wall Street. Its CEO, John Gutfreund, was nicknamed the King of Wall Street, and they had just added a major partner to the firm, Warren Buffett, who had bought a 12% stake in the company for $700 million. Salomon Brothers was busy making it large. This bunch of successful, ruthless bankers called themselves big swinging dicks, and based on what was about to unfold, this might have been an accurate description. Turns out one of the bank's employees, Paul Moser, was swinging more than Treasury rules allowed him to. According to a 1990 rule, a single firm wasn't allowed to bid for more than 35% of Treasury bonds in the market. However, Moser thought it would be a great idea to bid for all of the bonds in the market on behalf of other customers. He then stuffed those securities into Salomon's own accounts. That could have been the end of the dicks, but Salomon was too big to fail. Its collapse had the potential to shake the world's financial system to its core. So Jerome Powell, as Undersecretary of Finance, played his part in negotiating a deal where the firm paid close to $300 million in fines, its top brass was disqualified, and Warren Buffett took control. Years later, Powell had admitted that those events still give him nightmares. However, this was a major learning curve for Powell, who was soon back in private equity, joining the Carlyle Group in 1997. He stayed at Carlyle for another 8 years and ended up at the Bipartisan Policy Center as a scholar on public policy, a force behind the scenes. Even though Powell was now a private citizen, he was instrumental in preventing a federal default in 2011. He helped the Obama administration pass a bill that would raise the federal debt ceiling, allowing the government to borrow more and avoid defaulting on debt. Surprisingly, Powell, who was known as a Republican, was the shining knight in armor for the government. He made daily trips to the Capitol with long presentations, trying to convince the Republican lawmakers that the bill was absolutely essential for the economy. A readjusted bill passed the floor, and Powell helped avert one more disaster. Jerome Powell at the Fed. It was probably his growing repute as a strong bipartisan policymaker that earned him a seat on the Fed's Board of Governors in 2012. True to form, Powell was generally silent in the public eye and made his concerns known in private meetings. He has voted for every policy decision since joining the Fed, and even voted in favor of Ben Bernanke's quantitative easing. Simply put, it is a monetary policy in which the Fed itself buys bonds and pumps money into the market to support the economy. While he voted for the third round of this essentially bond-buying program, Powell did raise his concerns this time. He believed that continuing with the policy could encourage investors to take irresponsible risks, thinking that the Fed would cover up for them if their bets failed. The market in most cases will cheer us for doing more. It will never be enough for the market. Our models will always tell us that we are helping the economy, and I will probably always feel that those benefits are overestimated. Let's now fast forward to Jerome Powell's tenure as the head of the Fed. Jerome J. Powell became chairman of the Federal Reserve in 2018. On the surface, it seemed like a stable period in central banking. The economy was expanding, unemployment and inflation were low, and the financial system was stable. It seemed like Powell would preside over the Fed peacefully, but soon it was clear that this was going to be anything but a peaceful tenure. His first major step as the Fed chair was to introduce a policy that can be termed as quantitative tightening. It was seemingly an effort to roll back quantitative easing, as Powell announced that the Fed would reduce its balance sheet from US $4.5 trillion to a range of US $2.5 to $3 trillion over the next 4 years. The Fed also decided to raise interest rates in order to protect a booming economy from overheating and inviting bubbles. However, no one was impressed, investors were driven away, and markets declined. All of this made the then president, Donald Trump, very mad. Trump had championed the thriving markets ever since he took office, and this downward slope put him at odds with his own pick. Trump labelled Powell as the enemy and for a short while even threatened to sack him. However, Jerome Powell kept on making his own decisions, frustrating the president further, who accused him of wanting to appear tough. The Fed finally reversed course in 2019 and repeatedly cut the interest rates. This was probably the right time to do that because soon the economy had to fight the worst pandemic in a century. This was when Powell went back to quantitative easing. Even though Powell pointed out that his plan was different from Bernanke's plan, the ground reality was that the Fed's balance sheets went up to $9 trillion during the pandemic. This resulted in a stock market boom and boosted Powell's popularity, especially among young traders who would fall back on the Fed's stimulus if their investments failed. Jerome Powell and the Fed have generally been praised for their COVID response, but there's a major concern that maybe they overdid it. A key mistake. The Fed kept going with the pandemic policies in one way or another till November 2021, when Powell finally decided to cut back on their asset purchases. For more than a year, the Fed kept pumping dollars into the market so that the economy remained stable. However, they discounted one major threat on the horizon: the inflation. A booming economy standing on Fed's purchases was bound to result in inflation. For most of this time, the Fed has blamed this inflation on broken global supply chains during the pandemic. They thought that once the pandemic recovery was in full flow, the inflation would subside. However, this has not happened, and now there's a war to deal with. All of that has combined to prop up the worst inflation in 40 years, and this takes me back to Volcker in the 70s. Paul Volcker was battling unprecedented inflation caused by the oil shocks. His mantra was to introduce rate hikes never seen before or since. By November 1979, he had raised the interest rate to 13%, and within a year, the 20% benchmark was crossed. Such bold decisions caused a major dent in inflation, which plummeted to 2% in 1982 from 15% in 1980. However, Volcker knew that these measures will fast-track the economy into a recession. He reacted decisively, but there was a cost attached to it. Unemployment had breached the 10% mark, and business was nowhere to be found. Car retailers mailed car keys to Volcker for there were no buyers, and farmers were protesting outside the Federal Reserve. The economy was at a standstill. But why does Volcker matter now? Well, for one, the inflation is pretty bad, and the Fed has decided to hike interest rates to counter it. 2. Rate hikes have materialized already with a total of 6 planned throughout the year. Secondly, Jerome Powell has been in the news praising Paul Volcker for some tough decisions that no one else had the backbone to pull off. Like Volcker, Powell seems to be big on price stability. It's absolutely essential to restore price stability. Economies don't work without price stability. What happens next? While history doesn't always look upon Volcker kindly, Jerome Powell might have to follow his lead. What he has on his hands is a delicate balancing act, where he has to tame inflation while also making sure that there are no recessions to contend with. The Fed will hope to cut spendings through these measures, but they can't get it wrong because the consequences could be catastrophic, the worst case scenario being stagflation, where the prices keep soaring and the economy stays sluggish. And what about the man who has to pull the country through it all? Jerome Powell has remained optimistic that a recession is not on the cards. Throughout his career in the private firms and with the government, Powell has proved himself to be a flexible person. He doesn't rely too much on hardcore economics and isn't afraid of changing up his strategies. Despite the few problems he has created, he might just be the right man to get the economy back on track. For the US and for the world's financial stability's sake, I hope this turns out to be true. Do you guys think that Jerome Powell and the Fed have the right plan for the economy? Let me know in the comments below. And if you learned something new from this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Wealth Professor for more interesting videos on the economy.